The crystal throne room of the Salary Empire existed in permanent twilight. Not darkness, not light, but something caught between the two. Refracted starlight filtered through vaulted ceilings 3 stories high, splitting into bands of violet and gold that never quite touched the floor. The air itself held a peculiar quality, dense and expectant, like the moment before a storm breaks. Empress Alara Varys stood alone in the center of that vast emptiness. She raised one hand palm up and watched electricity dance across her skin. Blue-white tendrils arced from fingertip to fingertip, following pathways only she could feel. The circuit patterns beneath her teal skin pulsed brighter, responding to her focus. 20,000 volts. 30. 40. The air around her ionized, crackling with potential energy that had nowhere to go. A decorative column 20 feet away began to char. Black scorch marks bloomed across crystalline surface like frost spreading on glass. Alara clenched her fist and the energy died. The smell of ozone lingered acrid and sharp. 12 years. 12 years she had ruled this empire from this throne, and every day had felt like standing in the eye of her own hurricane. Forever surrounded by destruction she could not control. Forever alone in the center of her power. The memory came unbidden, as it always did in these quiet moments. She had been 20 years old. The training chamber had been smaller than this throne room, but just as empty. Instructor Kairos had stood across from her, patient and kind, his silver hair catching the light as he demonstrated the meditation forms again. Control your breathing, young one. The power follows the breath, in and out, like waves on shore. Alara had tried, she had tried so hard, but the electricity building beneath her skin had its own rhythm, its own tide. It swelled and swelled until she could not contain it anymore, until it burst from her in a wave that lit up the entire chamber like a sun-going nova. Kyrus had not even had time to scream. The bioelectric discharge stopped his heart instantly. He was dead before his body hit the floor. The Empress opened her eyes. 15 years since that day. 15 years of killing everyone and everything she touched. 3 years of brutal training after Kyrus learning to suppress, to contain, to never let anyone close enough to die. Then coronation at 23, when her mother passed peacefully in sleep, surrounded by loving family. A luxury Alara would never know. No one could sit at her bedside. No one could hold her hand as she crossed into whatever lay beyond. The throne room doors opened with a sound like ice cracking. Isolde entered, her footsteps soft against polished stone. The head handmaiden moved with the careful grace of someone who had spent decades learning exactly how close she could come to her mistress without dying. 52 years old silver threaded through her dark hair and still beautiful in the way that speaks of strength rather than fragility. She stopped precisely 15 feet away, the safe distance. Your Radiance, the court assembles in 1 hour for the arrival ceremony. Alara turned, and even that simple movement sent residual energy rippling through the air between them. Isolde's breathing apparatus fogged slightly as moisture ionized. The human tithe. Yes, your Radiance, Captain Garrett Thane of the Terran Coalition. Special operations. Isolde's voice carried no judgment, but Alara heard the concern beneath. The ambassadors assure us he volunteered. They always volunteer. Alara moved toward the preparation alcove, knowing Isolde would follow at her prescribed distance. No one forces soldiers to accept suicide missions. They simply make the alternative unbearable. The preparation ritual was one they had perfected over 12 years. Isolde laid out the ceremonial armor on a table, then retreated beyond the safety threshold. Alara dressed herself alone as always, while her handmaiden stood too far away to help. The golden plates curved around torso and shoulders, designed more to contain than protect. They left her arms bare so all could see the luminescent tracings beneath her skin, the visible proof of the power that made her both empress and exile in her own palace. Did he seem afraid? Alara asked, adjusting the shoulder guard. In the briefing recordings, Isolde considered this. Know your Radiance. He seemed calm, almost curious. Curious, how novel. Most beings who entered this throne room wore their terror like a second skin. Alara could smell fear in the way their sweat turned acrid, see it in the dilation of their pupils, taste it in the way the air itself seemed to shrink away from contact. But curiosity, that was different. She finished dressing and took her place on the elevated dais. The throne felt cold beneath her, as it always did. Temperature regulation meant nothing when your own body generated enough heat to cook flesh. Everything was cold to Alara, everything except herself. The court began to file in, generals in gleaming armor, their medals catching light, diplomats draped in gossamer silks that floated on the ionized currents her presence created, advisors clutching data slates, their eyes carefully averted. Lord Drevek took his position to her right, his slender frame wrapped in purple robes that seemed to absorb light. At 60 years old, he had served 3 empresses, and his smile held the practiced warmth of someone who meant none of it. General Thorne positioned himself on her left, broad-shouldered and rigid, 45 and ambitious, every inch the traditional military commander. His hand rested on his ceremonial blade, as if Alara needed protection from anything other than herself. The assembly numbered perhaps 300, all of them maintaining their careful distances, creating a void around her throne that made her feel like a disease no one dared contract. Then came the footsteps. Thud, thud, thud. Not the soft glide of courtiers trained in palace etiquette, not the precise click of military boots on parade. These were the heavy, deliberate impacts of someone who had walked through worse than polished stone and decorative crystal. Each footfall echoed through the chamber with a finality that made the assembled court turn as one. Captain Garrett Thane kept walking. He stood 6'4", and every inch of that height carried the dense muscle of a body built for high-gravity worlds. 240 pounds of reinforced skeletal structure and cardiovascular systems designed to fight forces that would crush frailer species. His uniform bore the insignia of Terran Special Operations, dark gray and functional, no ornamentation beyond his rank designation. But it was his face that held Alara's attention, weathered and scarred with a raised line along his jaw that spoke of close combat. His eyes were pale blue, steady and assessing, and they did not waver as he crossed the threshold into what the Solari considered safe distance, 15 feet. The bioelectric field extending from Alara's body began to register on his nervous system. She could see the exact moment it happened. His pupils dilated slightly, the muscles around his eyes tightened, but he did not stop walking. 12 feet. The pressure would be building now, like static before a lightning strike. An unpleasant tingling that spread across skin and made every nerve ending report the same urgent message. Danger. Flee. Survive. 10 feet. Courtier near the back fainted. The general beside her stumbled back 3 steps, his breathing apparatus fogging with condensation as the air between him and the Empress ionized further. Garrett stopped exactly 10 feet from the dais. His spine remained straight. His hands hung loose at his sides, not clenched in pain or reaching for weapons he did not carry. Military bearing kept his face neutral, but Alara could see the signs. A faint sheen of sweat on his forehead, the deliberate control of his breathing, the slight tension in his shoulders. He was uncomfortable, but he was not dying. You are the human tithe. Alara's voice carried the resonance of a tuning fork, beautiful and slightly painful to Solari ears. Captain Garrett Thane, ma'am, Terran Coalition Special Operations. His voice was deep and rough-edged, the accent placing him somewhere in Earth's northern territories. A murmur rippled through the court. He had used her military designation rather than the flowery titles that usually preceded any address to the throne. Lord Drevek made a small gesture of disapproval. General Thorne's hand tightened on his blade. Alara descended 3 steps. The air between them crackled visibly now. Energy leaped from her fingertips to the metalwork of her armor in jagged bursts. Another courtier collapsed. One diplomat's breathing apparatus shattered, forcing them to retreat from the chamber entirely. 8 feet, 7, 6. The pressure increased to the point where most beings would experience cardiac arrest. Alara had killed at this distance before, not through malice, but through simple proximity. She watched Garrett's jaw clench involuntarily, saw his skin prickle, as if 1,000 needles pressed without quite puncturing, but his heart kept beating. Strong and steady, she could almost feel it through the electromagnetic field between them. She stopped 5 feet away, close enough to see the minute scars that marked his face and hands, close enough to watch the way his pupils contracted and dilated as his sympathetic nervous system struggled to process her aura as a threat it could not escape. You're sweating. It's warm in here, ma'am. Yeah, ma'am. I'm generating approximately 40,000 volts across my skin surface. Lesser species experience cardiac arrest at this proximity. Garrett met her gaze without flinching. I'm experiencing moderate discomfort and elevated core temperature. My sympathetic nervous system is responding appropriately, but there's no cardiac involvement. For the first time in 12 years, Empress Alara Varys did not know what to say. She had prepared herself for another death, another body carried from her throne room, while courtiers whispered about the glass storm who could not be touched. She had steeled herself against the weight of one more casualty added to 15 years of isolation. Instead, this massive scarred human stood before her and treated her lethal aura like weather, like something merely inconvenient. General Thorne stepped forward, his hand now fully on his energy blade. Your Radiance, this creature may have cybernetic shielding. We should conduct a proper examination to ensure he poses no threat. No. The word cracked like thunder. Alara circled Garrett slowly, and he allowed it, turning his head to track her movement, but otherwise remaining still. She intensified her aura, deliberately testing, measuring. At his back, the energy felt like sunburn developing in real time. His shoulders tensed but held their position. She completed the circuit and found herself staring up at him. Even with her above-average height, he still had 6 inches on her. She had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. He is exactly what was promised, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. A Deathworlder. Welcome to the Salary Empire, Captain Thane. Try not to break anything. I'll do my best, ma'am. As the court erupted into scandalized whispers, Alara caught Isolde's eye across the throne room. The older woman smiled knowingly. The Empress had finally found something she could not destroy by proximity, something that would not shatter at her touch, someone who would not die. The thought terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. The royal gardens occupied 3 acres beneath a dome of crystal composite that filtered the system's binary stars into gentle, shifting light. Alara had insisted on conducting the diplomatic tour personally, overruling General Thorne's suggestion that Garrett be confined to military barracks for observation. He survived your presentation, Thorne had argued that morning, his voice tight with barely suppressed anger. That does not make him civilized. We know nothing of his true capabilities or intentions. He volunteered for what every analyst agreed was a death sentence, Alara had countered. That makes him either extraordinarily brave or extraordinarily foolish. Either way, I intend to determine which. Now she walked the crystalline pathways, with Garrett maintaining a respectful 3 paces behind, and found herself glancing back more than protocol dictated. He moved quietly for someone his size, his footfalls absorbed by the specialized flooring. In the filtered light, his scars were more visible. That raised line along his jaw, puncture marks on his left forearm that suggested claws, what looked like old burned tissue across the back of his neck. Evidence of survival, evidence that he had walked through fire and teeth and blade and lived to carry the marks. You're staring, ma'am. Heat that had nothing to do with her power crept up Alara's neck. I'm observing. There is a difference. If you say so, ma'am. They reached the Viper Vine exhibit, and Alara paused. The plant sprawled across a reinforced platinum lattice, its leaves midnight blue with silver veins that pulsed with stored toxin. Beautiful and absolutely lethal, like everything else in her world. This is one of our most prized specimens. She activated the information display with a gesture. Extracted from the death forests of Solara Prime. Its thorns contain a neurotoxin so potent it can kill an adult Solari in 4 seconds. The paralysis begins with voluntary muscle tissue and spreads rapidly to autonomic systems. Noted. Garrett stepped closer to examine the plant, his attention focused on the root structure. 3 thorns scraped his forearm as he leaned in. Alara's hand shot out instinctively, then stopped. She could not grab him, could not pull him away from the poison without electrocuting him. Her breath caught as she watched him roll up his sleeve to examine the shallow scratches. 3 parallel lines welled red against his tan skin. Captain, Isolde rushed forward with a medical kit, her practiced hands already reaching for anti-venom injectors. Garrett waved her off gently. I'm fine. You are not fine. Alara's composure cracked her earlier calm, fracturing. That toxin paralyzes voluntary muscle tissue. Your lungs will stop functioning in approximately 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Garrett checked his chronometer, then scratched at the wounds which were already clotting. It itches a bit. Histamine response. I'll take an antihistamine when we get back to address the inflammation, but there's no neurotoxic response. Alara stared. That is impossible. It's comparative biochemistry, ma'am. The toxin evolved to target salary neural pathways. Human neurochemistry operates on different neurotransmitters and receptor sites. It's like trying to pick a lock with the wrong key. The mechanism does not engage. Isolde, who had been preparing 3 different injectors based on estimated body weight and exposure level, slowly lowered her medical kit. You're serious? Yes, ma'am. A drop of blood ran down Garrett's arm and dripped onto the white stone path. Alara watched it fall with an expression she could not quite name. It was the first time she had seen something harm him even superficially. The first time she had seen proof that he could bleed. The first time she had realized that what killed her people was merely irritating to him, but other things might succeed where her power failed. You're going to be a problem, Captain Thane. How so, ma'am? She gestured at the vine at his arm, at the general absurdity of a universe that would send her someone who survived her touch, but could be killed by 1,000 other things. Every biological weapon in our arsenal, every environmental hazard we have cataloged for lethality, you are going to walk through all of them like they are mild weather. Garrett considered this with the same calm he had shown standing in her bioelectric field. Probably, ma'am. The laugh escaped before Alara could suppress it. It started as a chuckle, but grew into genuine laughter that echoed off the crystal dome. The sound felt foreign in her own ears. How long since she had laughed like this? How long since anything had struck her as absurd rather than tragic? Isolde's eyes widened. She had served Alara for 12 years through the darkest periods of learning to control power that wanted only to destroy. She had never heard her Empress laugh with such unguarded joy. When Alara finally controlled herself, she wiped carefully at her eyes. Lord Dravek is going to have an aneurysm when he learns of this. Is that a salary medical condition, ma'am? It is now. She gestured for them to continue walking, but this time she walked beside him rather than ahead. The shift felt significant, though she could not have articulated why. Tell me, Captain Thane, what would actually kill you? Kinetic trauma mostly, high-velocity projectiles, explosive decompression, anything that causes massive tissue damage faster than my body can compensate. Extreme temperature differential beyond my metabolism's ability to regulate. Flash frozen or burned past the point of cellular recovery. Sufficient blood loss. Those would all be effective. So normal threats by human standards. Yes, ma'am. Alara looked up at him, still marveling at the fact that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. She was accustomed to towering over her subjects both literally and through the force of her power. This reversal felt strange, uncomfortable, almost pleasant. And my aura, honestly, ma'am, it's unpleasant, like working in high heat with poor ventilation. Sustainable for extended periods, but uncomfortable the entire time. Extended periods. She could kill most beings in seconds, and he could tolerate her presence for hours. The implications of that simple fact hit her like a physical blow. She could be near him, could work beside him, could exist in proximity to another living being without constantly calculating lethal radius and exposure time. As they walked deeper into the gardens, Alara caught her reflection in a crystal panel. She saw herself standing close to another person for the first time in 15 years, not hovering at lethal distance, not isolated by necessity, but walking side by side with someone who did not flinch. Behind them, Isolde made a mental note to inform the household staff that the Empress might finally have found what she had been missing. Not a weapon or a shield or another tool of state, but a friend, or perhaps something more profound than friendship. Something Alara had stopped believing she could ever have. Someone who could stay. The state dinner occupied the palace's grand hall where 500 of the Empire's most powerful beings gathered to observe, judge, and scheme. Long tables formed concentric circles around a raised central platform where Empress Alara presided in her ceremonial armor. Garrett sat at a smaller table to her right, close enough to demonstrate imperial favor but enough to maintain the appearance of propriety. Lord Dravek sat opposite the human, his slender frame draped in robes of deep purple that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He had been watching Garrett all evening with the focused intensity of someone planning a vivisection. Captain Thane, Dravek's voice carried the honey-smooth tones of practiced diplomacy. I trust you find our cuisine acceptable. Garrett glanced at his plate, which held something that resembled crystallized seafood garnished with what the server had identified as luminous herbs. It tasted like salted glass with a hint of mint. "It's interesting, Lord Dravek. How diplomatic." Dravek gestured, and a servant appeared with a crystal decanter. "Perhaps you would enjoy our ceremonial wine. It is pressed from fruit grown in Solara Prime's high-altitude gardens. Quite rare. I have been aging this particular vintage in my private cellars for occasions of special significance." Garrett watched as the servant poured amber liquid into his glass. His olfactory sense, sharpened by years of field operations and basic survival instinct, caught something beneath the wine's fruity top notes. Bitter almond, acidic base, organic compound structure, matching the viper vine toxin, refined and concentrated. He could smell it as clearly as perfume. Across the hall, Laura appeared, engaged in conversation with a trade minister, but her attention kept drifting to Garrett's table. She had positioned him there deliberately, knowing Dravek would attempt something. It was a test of Garrett of Dravek of the political waters they all navigated. Garrett lifted the glass and swirled it gently. The toxin concentration was significant enough to kill 3 ciliary simultaneously. In a human, it would cause elevated histamine response, mild vasodilation, and possibly some temporary loss of fine motor control. Essentially, it would make him tipsy. General Thorne, seated to Dravek's left, leaned forward with predatory interest. "You hesitate, Captain. Is something wrong with the wine?" Every eye at the table now focused on Garrett. He could feel Alara's attention lock onto him as well, her bioelectric field spiking slightly with tension that made the air shimmer. Garrett met Dravek's eyes. The High Chancellor's expression remained perfectly neutral, perfectly polite, perfectly murderous beneath the diplomatic veneer. Garrett drained the glass in one long pull. The toxin hit his system immediately. His peripheral blood vessels dilated, warming his skin. His heart rate elevated slightly as histamines flooded his bloodstream in response to the foreign compound. His fingers tingled with the sensation of increased blood flow. It felt approximately like downing 3 shots of whiskey on an empty stomach. Uncomfortable, manageable, and utterly non-lethal to his biochemistry. He set the empty glass down and held Dravek's gaze. "That's excellent. May I have another?" The table went silent. Dravek's composure cracked for just a fraction of a second. A widening of the eyes, a slight intake of breath that betrayed genuine shock. Then he recovered, but the damage was done. Everyone at the table had witnessed it. "Of course." The word came out slightly strangled. Dravek nodded to the servant, whose hands trembled as they poured another glass. Garrett drank that one too. Now he definitely felt the effects. A pleasant warmth spreading through his chest, a slight looseness in his shoulders and neck. His tactical implant began filtering the toxin, automatically breaking it down into harmless metabolites. He would be completely sober in 20 minutes. From the central platform, Alara's laugh rang out. Not the polite titter expected at formal dinners, but a genuine bark of delighted amusement. She pressed one glowing hand to her mouth, trying to maintain decorum, but her eyes were bright with unmistakable mirth. "Is something amusing your radiance?" General Thorne asked loudly, attempting to redirect attention from his own table's obvious failure. "Oh yes, General." Alara stood, and the entire hall fell into immediate silence. When the Empress rose, the Empire held its breath. "I am amused by the High Chancellor's hospitality. Lord Dravek, you serve our honored guest wine from your private reserve. How extraordinarily generous of you." Dravek's face went pale. "Your radiance, You merely shared your finest vintage with our Terran representative. The vintage that, according to intelligence reports from my personal network, you have been aging in barrels treated with concentrated viper vine extract." She descended from the platform, her aura intensifying until the air crackled with visible energy. A vintage that would be lethal to any salary who consumed it. The hall erupted in gasps and scandalized whispers. Dravek's carefully constructed facade shattered completely. "Your radiance, I assure you this is a misunderstanding." "You assure me nothing." Alara stopped beside Garrett's table, and the temperature in the immediate area increased by 5 degrees. "Captain Thane, how do you feel?" "Pleasantly relaxed, ma'am," Garrett reported honestly, noting the slight slur in his own words. "Though I should probably switch to water for the remainder of the evening." "Probably wise." She turned back to Drabek and her voice dropped to a register that made everyone instinctively lean away. Lord Drabek, you attempted to poison my guest with a toxin that would kill me in seconds. Yet he sits before us requesting refills as if you had served him common spirits. She let that sink in, watched it register across the face of every noble and military officer present. I believe this adequately demonstrates why Terra chose Captain Thane as their representative. He is precisely what we needed to remember. And what is that, your radiance? Someone called from the back. Ilara smiled and electricity rippled across her skin in waves. That we are not the only apex predators in this galaxy. That power comes in many forms, and that underestimating those who appear vulnerable is the fastest path to failure. She returned to her platform, but before resuming her seat, she caught Garrett's eye across the hall and did something that sent shockwaves through the political establishment more profound than any bioelectric discharge. She winked. Garrett, feeling the wine now but maintaining his composure through sheer discipline, had to suppress a smile. Isolde, serving at the Empress's side, leaned in and whispered something that made Alara's grin widen. As the evening continued and conversations resumed at a higher pitch, charged with new energy and speculation, Garrett noticed Drabek watching him with open calculation. The High Chancellor had revealed his hand and lost spectacularly. Men like Drabek always had contingencies, always planned 3 moves ahead. Garrett made a mental note to check his quarters for additional surprises. Later, when the dinner finally concluded and guests began filtering toward the exits, Alara descended to Garrett's level. Walk with me, Captain. They moved to a balcony overlooking the capital city where her guards maintained a discreet distance. The night air was cool and the city's lights spread out below them like a circuit board of bioluminescent streets and energy-efficient buildings. Beautiful and alien and utterly divorced from anything Garrett had known on Earth. You knew. Alara's voice was quiet, meant for his ears alone. You knew the wine was poisoned. Yes, ma'am. And you drank it anyway. Yes, ma'am. Why, Garrett chose his words with care. Because if I had refused, Drabek would claim I insulted his hospitality and call it a diplomatic incident. If I had accused him openly, he would demand proof I could not provide without revealing intelligence sources and methods. But if I drank it and survived with no apparent difficulty, he shrugged. Then he is simply the fool who tried to kill someone unkillable. The humiliation is his, not mine, and you gain political capital by defending your guest against treachery. Alara was quiet for a long moment, her bioluminescent patterns pulsating in a rhythm that might have been her heartbeat. You are more dangerous than I thought, Captain Thane. How so, ma'am? She turned to face him fully, and in the dim light, her glow painted her features in soft blues and whites. Because you are not merely resilient, you are clever. You think strategically, not just tactically. You understand the deeper game being played here. I've had good teachers. That combination of traits could change everything. Everything is a large word, ma'am. Yes. Alara's voice was soft. It is. They stood in companionable silence, watching the city below. In those quiet moments, something shifted between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two beings who had spent too long alone, who had learned to survive isolation by treating it as armor, recognizing in each other a possibility they had stopped believing could exist, the possibility of connection. Inside the palace, Lord Drabek retired to his private chambers and began revising his plans. The human was more than a simple soldier. He was an intelligent tactician who had just made Drabek look incompetent before the entire court. That could not stand. General Thorne stood at his window overlooking the city and calculated trajectories. The Empress was growing dependent on the alien. That dependency was a weakness regardless of what Alara claimed. Weaknesses could be exploited. And Isolde, preparing the Empress's chambers for the night, smiled to herself. For 12 years, she had watched Alara slowly crystallize into living glass, beautiful and untouchable and desperately lonely. Now finally there was warmth in her mistress's eyes, laughter in her voice. Hope. It was the most dangerous thing in the universe, hope. It made you vulnerable. It gave enemies leverage. But it also made you alive in ways that mere survival never could. Isolde finished her preparations and withdrew, leaving the chambers empty for the Empress, who would soon retire to another night of sleeping alone, surrounded by silence and the faint hum of her own power. But perhaps not for much longer. Perhaps things were finally about to change. The gauntlet had been designed by General Thorne's predecessor as the ultimate test of Solari military prowess, a three-dimensional obstacle course that required perfect synchronization between advanced technology and physical capability. Anti-gravity boots to scale vertical surfaces, energy shields to absorb the punishment of laser grids, neural interface gloves to hack security systems in milliseconds. No one had ever completed it without the full suite of required equipment. Alara sat in the observation gallery, her hands gripping the railing as she watched Garrett stand at the starting line in his standard-issue combat boots. Nothing else. No technology, no enhancements beyond whatever his Deathworlder physiology provided. "This is absurd," General Thorne announced to the assembled crowd of officers and courtiers. His voice carried the satisfaction of someone about to prove a point. "The course requires specific equipment. Without it, completion is impossible." Garrett looked up at the 30-foot vertical wall that formed the first obstacle. "Then I'll do the impossible, sir." Isolde stood beside Alara's chair, close enough to observe but maintaining proper distance. "Your radiance, you could stop this. One word from you, and no." Alara's eyes never left Garrett. He knew what he was accepting when Thorne issued the invitation. "If I intervene now, I undermine him before the entire military command. They will see it as weakness, or they could see it as protection. They would see it as proof that I believe he needs protection." Alara leaned forward as the countdown began. "Let us discover what he can do without it." The starting buzzer sounded. Garrett studied the wall for perhaps 3 seconds, then pulled his combat knife from its sheath. The blade was simple carbon steel, nothing fancy but functional. He jammed it into the seam between composite panels and pulled himself up. Then again, and again. Each movement controlled and efficient, using the knife as a makeshift piton, while his other hand found purchase on the tiny imperfections in the wall surface. Muscle groups engineered for high-gravity environments made the climb look effortless. His breathing remained steady, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Alara found herself holding her breath as he reached the top and dropped into a roll on the other side. The watching officers murmured among themselves, but Thorne's expression remained carefully neutral. The second obstacle was a laser grid. Hundreds of beams crisscrossing a narrow corridor, programmed to shift patterns every 3 seconds. Competitors normally use personal shields to absorb the hits while sprinting through at maximum speed. Garrett stopped at the threshold and watched. 9 seconds passed while he studied the pattern, his eyes tracking the movement of the beams with predatory focus. Then he moved. His body flowed through the gaps like water finding channels in stone, bending, twisting, diving beneath beams that would have burned through salary flesh in milliseconds. Once a beam grazed his shoulder, burning through his uniform with a smell of scorched fabric and skin. He did not slow. When he emerged on the other side, smoke rose from the wound. "Medical violation," one of Thorne's officers shouted from the gallery. "He's injured. By regulation, he must withdraw for treatment." Garrett rolled his shoulder, experimentally testing range of motion. "First-degree burn. I'm mobile, at the darn." Continuing. Alara's hands tightened on the railing. She could see the burn from here, angry and red against his skin. It had to hurt, but his face showed nothing except calm determination. The third obstacle was a locked security door that required both a 16-digit code and a biometric scan. The code changed every 30 seconds, pulled from a randomized database that made brute force attempts effectively impossible. Competitors used neural interface gloves to hack the system and bypass the lock. Garrett studied the door for a moment, then stepped back. He kicked it. The reinforced composite held. He kicked again. A crack appeared in the frame. Third kick, the frame buckled. Fourth kick, the door crashed inward. Its locking mechanism sheared completely off the wall. The crowd gasped. Someone yelled, "That door was rated to withstand explosive charges." Garrett stepped through the wreckage. It wasn't rated for repeated kinetic impacts at this force level. Alara felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Not just admiration for his capability, but something deeper. He approached problems the way she had learned to approach her own power. Not fighting against limitations, but finding alternative paths. Not elegant or sophisticated, but brutally effective. The final obstacle was a zero-gravity chamber where competitors had to navigate floating platforms to reach the exit portal. Without anti-gravity boots, maintaining orientation was impossible. Most beings would drift helplessly until time expired. Garrett grabbed the edge of the first platform and pulled using his mass to swing it. Then he jumped to the next using momentum and raw strength to effectively swim through zero gravity by throwing platforms behind him for thrust. It was inelegant. It was primitive. It absolutely was not how the course was designed to be completed. It worked. When Garrett emerged from the exit portal, silence filled the observation gallery. His time was 17 seconds slower than the course record, but he had completed it with none of the required equipment, with nothing but human stubbornness and Deathworlder physiology. Alara stood. The movement drew to every eye in the gallery. She began to clap. The sound echoed in the silence, rhythmic and deliberate. Slowly others joined. Even some of Thorne's own officers could not suppress their applause for what they had just witnessed. Thorne's face remained stone. "Impressive, Captain, though I note you caused significant property damage to Imperial equipment." Garrett's breathing was elevated but controlled. "I completed the objective, sir. The condition of the course was not specified as a completion parameter." Alara descended from the gallery, her entourage parting before her, like water before a ship's prow. When she reached Garrett, power crackled across her skin, not from anger but from something else. Excitement, pride, the strange thrill of watching someone succeed against impossible odds. "That was the most brutally pragmatic thing I have ever witnessed, Captain Thane." "Thank you, ma'am." She turned to address the assembled crowd, making sure her voice carried to every corner of the chamber. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. The Terran do not fight the way we fight. They do not think the way we think. They do not solve problems the way we expect problems to be solved. And that, General Thorne, is precisely why we need them as allies rather than enemies." Thorne's bow was stiff, his jaw tight. "As you say, Your Radiance." But Alara saw the calculation in his eyes, the wounded pride, the dangerous combination of humiliation and authority. She had made an enemy of him today, she realized. For Garrett's sake, for the sake of proving a point about strength and adaptability and the many forms power could take. It was worth it. She would deal with the consequences later. Later came sooner than expected. The medical bay occupied a quiet corner of the palace's eastern wing, all soft lighting and advanced equipment. Garrett sat on an examination table while a technician treated the laser burn across his shoulder and wrapped the 2 fractured metatarsals in his right foot. The damage from kicking through a security door rated to withstand military-grade explosives. Alara had dismissed her guards and stood closer than she normally would. Still outside lethal range, but near enough to see the burns and bruises marking his body. Evidence of what he had endured to prove a point. "You did not have to do that," she said quietly. "Yes, I did, ma'am." "Your hands are burned. You have laser scoring across your back. You fractured bones in your foot, kicking a door hard enough to destroy reinforced composite." "It'll heal." Garrett's voice was matter-of-fact. "Human regenerative capacity is significantly enhanced compared to baseline expectations. The fractures will knit in 72 hours. The burns will fade in a week." Alara shook her head but found herself moving closer without conscious decision. The technician finished and withdrew, leaving them alone. "That still does not make it acceptable. You could have been seriously hurt." "I've been hurt worse, ma'am." "That does not make this better." "No," Garrett acknowledged, "but it makes it survivable. And survivable is usually good enough." She studied the scars visible on his arms and neck, each one a story of survival, of damage sustained and overcome. "How did you get these?" She gestured at the puncture marks on his forearm. "Training accident on Europa. Creature from the subsurface ocean got loose in the facility. It disagreements with the containment protocols. And this, the burn tissue on his neck. Plasma discharge during a boarding action. Glancing hit. I got lucky." "Lucky." Alara's voice held a note she could not quite identify. "You have an interesting definition of luck, Captain Thane." "I'm alive, ma'am. By my standards, that's lucky." She wanted to touch the scars, to trace her fingers across the evidence of his survival and feel the texture of healed tissue beneath her palm. But she could not. Even now, even with him, that simple gesture remained impossible without risking his life. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She could be near him, could talk to him, could enjoy his presence without constantly calculating exposure time and lethal radius. But she still could not touch him. Not safely, not the way she suddenly desperately wanted to. "I'm tired of being alone." The words escaped before she could stop them. Quiet and raw and more honest than anything she had said in 12 years of careful political speech. Garrett met her eyes. I'm here now. That has to count for something. Does it, though? Her voice threatened to break. I have been alone since I was 20 years old. 15 years of isolation. 15 years of watching people maintain their careful distances, of sleeping in empty rooms, of never feeling another being's touch without killing them. She turned away, unable to bear the steadiness of his gaze. Do you know what that does to someone? To go 15 years without contact, without the most basic physical connection that every other being takes for granted. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice held no pity, only understanding. No, ma'am, I don't know what that feels like, but I know what it's like to be set apart, to be treated as a weapon instead of a person, to have people see your utility before they see you. Alara looked back at him. Is that why you volunteered for this suicide mission that everyone knew would kill you? Partly. He considered his words carefully. I wanted to prove I could be more than just a weapon, that I could build bridges instead of burning them, that maybe strength could be used for connection instead of destruction. And has it connected anything? Garrett's smile was small but genuine. I'm sitting here talking to you, aren't I? Not dead on your throne room floor. I'd say that's a pretty significant connection. The laugh escaped before Alara could stop it. It felt good. It felt real in a way that political smiles and diplomatic pleasantries never did. You make it sound simple. It is simple, ma'am. Not easy, but simple. You needed someone who could survive your presence. I can do that. Everything else is just details we figure out as we go. She moved closer, still maintaining distance, but less distance than before. Close enough to see the flecks of darker blue in his pale eyes. Close enough to smell the antiseptic from his burns and the honest sweat of physical exertion. I need to tell you something, she said. Something I have not spoken about in 15 years. I'm listening. Alara took a breath, then another. The words felt like stones in her throat, heavy and sharp-edged. When I was 20 years old, my power fully manifested. Before that, it had been manageable, controllable. I could touch people, could be touched, could live a normal life within the imperial palace. She watched her hands as she spoke, watched the glowing pathways pulse beneath her skin. But at 20, something changed. The bioelectric field intensified beyond anything the physicians had predicted. I needed to learn control quickly, or I would be a danger to everyone around me. What happened? My instructor was a man named Kairos. He had served my mother during her own power manifestation, helped her learn control when she was young. He was patient and kind, and he believed I could master this. Her voice wavered. We were in the training chamber. He was demonstrating meditation techniques, breathing exercises to help regulate the energy flow. Garrett said nothing, just listened with that steady attention that made her feel heard rather than judged. I tried so hard to control it, but the power had its own rhythm, its own tide. It built and built until I could not contain it anymore, until it exploded out of me in a wave that lit up the entire chamber. She looked at Garrett now, letting him see the grief that lived behind her careful control. He did not even have time to scream. The bioelectric discharge stopped his heart instantly. He was dead before his body hit the floor. And I killed the only person who believed I could be more than just a weapon. The silence stretched between them, filled with the hum of medical equipment and the distant sounds of the palace. For 3 years after that, I trained alone. Suppressors and isolation protocols, and learning to keep everyone at a distance so I could never hurt anyone again. They crowned me at 23, and I have ruled for 12 years from the center of my own exclusion zone. 12 years of never touching another being. 12 years of loneliness so profound it became normal. She wiped at her eyes, surprised to find them wet. When had she started crying? You are the first person in all that time who has survived my proximity. The first person I can be near without constantly calculating how to keep them alive. Do you understand what that means to me? Garrett nodded slowly. It means whatever happens from here, you have someone who can stand beside you. Someone who won't break. You don't have to carry this alone. I don't want to carry it alone. The admission came out as barely a whisper. I'm so tired of being alone. She reached out, slowly giving him time to move away if he chose. Her hand extended toward his, trembling slightly with fear and hope in equal measure. Garrett did not move away. He raised his own hand to meet hers, moving with the same careful deliberation. Their fingertips touched. Energy arced between them, visible in the medical bay's soft light. Blue-white tendrils leaping from her skin to his finding pathways through the ionized air. Garrett's jaw clenched as his nervous system registered the charge, but he did not pull away. The circuit completed. Power flowed, but this time Alara controlled it, measured it, kept it at a level that his enhanced physiology could manage. It still had to hurt, she knew. Had to be unpleasant at minimum. But he held steady, and she could feel the warmth of his skin against hers. First touch in 15 years. First deliberate contact with another living being since Kairos died on the training chamber floor. Alara made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Tears ran freely down her face now, and she did not try to stop them. Could not stop them. 15 years of grief and isolation and desperate loneliness breaking through careful control like water through a cracked dam. I can touch you, she whispered. I can actually touch you. Garrett's voice was tight with the effort of managing the electrical current flowing through his body, but steady. Yes, ma'am, you can. She pulled her hand back, breaking the contact before she hurt him more than necessary. But the sensation remained. The memory of warmth and connection and the simple miracle of skin against skin without death following immediately after. Isolde appeared in the doorway, drawn by some instinct or perhaps the sound of crying. She took in the scene with a glance, her Empress with tears streaming down her face. The humans sitting calm and steady, the air still crackling with residual energy from their contact. Understanding bloomed across her weathered features. Your radiance is everything. Everything is perfect. Alara turned to her handmaiden, her mentor, her friend, who had stood too far away for 12 years. Breaking 15 years of isolation, Isolde. Everything is absolutely perfect. The older woman smiled and her own eyes grew bright. I am glad your radiance. So very glad. Later, after Garrett had been escorted to his quarters and Alara had composed herself enough to resume imperial dignity, Isolde helped her prepare for the evening. They spoke of trivial things, schedule adjustments, tomorrow's council session, the state of repairs to the damaged gauntlet course. But beneath the mundane conversation ran a current of change. Both of them felt it. Something fundamental had shifted today. Some barrier had been crossed that could not be uncrossed. Alara had touched someone, had allowed herself to be vulnerable, had admitted to loneliness and grief and the weight of 15 years isolation. And the universe had not ended. The palace had not collapsed. She had not destroyed the only person who could withstand her presence. Instead, something new had begun, something fragile and precious and terrifying in its possibility. Hope. Midnight found Alara in her private chambers attempting to sleep and failing. Her bioelectric field felt unstable tonight, pulsing with irregular rhythms that spoke of stress or excitement or the emotional turbulence of a day that had changed everything. She had dismissed Isolde hours ago, preferring to deal with the insomnia alone. Safer that way. If her power spiked during the night, she did not want anyone close enough to be hurt. Except now there was someone who could be close. Someone who could survive even if her control failed. The thought was intoxicating and dangerous in equal measure. The first warning was a pressure change in the air. Subtle but noticeable to someone who had spent 15 years monitoring her own bioelectric field with obsessive attention. The palace's security grid was fluctuating, power routing in unusual patterns. Something was wrong. Alara sat up just as her communication device chirped. Garrett's voice came through tight with urgency. Captain Thane to Empress, your radiance, you need to respond immediately. She activated the connection. I'm here, Captain. What? Don't move. Stay exactly where you are. I'm coming to you. The connection cut. Ilara's heart rate spiked, and with it, her bioelectric output. The lights in her chamber flickered. She forced herself to breathe to control the surge before it became an overload. Then she felt it. The wrongness building in her own body, the energy spiraling higher responding to stress and adrenaline, and the sudden spike of danger awareness flooding her system. Her chronic condition, the slow deterioration that had been getting worse over the years, was manifesting now at the worst possible moment. Her power was going haywire. The sensation started as heat beneath her skin, then pressure, then pain as the bioelectric charge built beyond safe limits. Her luminescent tracings blazed so bright they hurt to look at. Energy arced from her fingertips to the metal fixtures in the room, scorching tapestries and leaving the tang of ozone thick in the air. Alara tried to access the control techniques she had spent 15 years perfecting. Breathing exercises, mental visualization, anything to dial back the output before she cooked herself from the inside out. Nothing worked. The power had its own momentum, now feeding on itself in a cascade that would not stop until it either dissipated or killed her. Her door exploded inward. Not opened. Exploded. The locking mechanism sheared off the wall as someone kicked it with enough force to buckle reinforced composite. Garrett entered at a run, his sidearm raised. Behind him, smoke rose from the corridor, where two Praetorian guards lay unconscious, their armor showing scorch marks but no lethal damage. Stun weapons. Someone wanted stealth, not massacre. Then Alara saw the second figure. Crouched beside her bed, energy blade in hand, was an assassin in stealth armor. The blade was positioned for a downward strike that would pierce directly through her heart. The assassin moved. Garrett was faster. He crossed the distance in 4 long strides, dropping into a forward roll that brought him inside the blade's arc. His shoulder slammed into the assassin's midsection with the force of a battering ram. The figure went airborne, crashing into furniture with devastating impact. But the assassin was fast, professional, trained. She recovered almost instantly, bringing the energy blade up in a defensive guard position. Garrett grabbed her wrist. The radiant heat from the blade blistered his palm, burning through skin with the smell of cooking meat. He ignored it with the same calm he had shown, drinking poison, twisting her wrist until bones ground together and the weapon clattered free. "Apologies," he said, and introduced her face to the floor. The impact was measured. Enough to stun, not to kill. The floor tile cracked. The assassin went limp. Garrett secured her hands with zip ties from his tactical kit, then turned to assess Alara. Through it all, Alara's power continued to surge. She was dimly aware of Garrett restraining the unconscious assassin, of him turning towards her, of Isolde, he appearing in the doorway with a medical kit. "The Empress." Isolde's voice was shaking. "Her energy is overloading. If it continues, it will cook her from inside. We have suppressors in the medical wing, but by the time I retrieve them," Garrett was already moving toward Alara. "Don't!" Isolde's scream of warning came too late. "Captain, no! She'll kill you!" "Probably not," Garrett said, and placed both hands on Alara's shoulders. The electrical discharge hit him like grabbing a live power conduit. Every muscle in his body locked tight as current coursed through him, looking for a path to ground. His nervous system registered agony in vivid detail. Voltage differential, resistance calculations, thermal damage accumulation. But human bodies engineered for high-gravity worlds had redundancy. Thicker bones, denser muscle tissue, cardiovascular systems designed to fight G-forces that would black out frailer species, and critically a metabolism that generated significant waste heat during normal operation. Garrett's body became a heat sink. The energy flowing from Alara did not just discharge into him. It converted to thermal energy as his physiology acted as a massive biological resistor. Heat his hyperactive metabolism knew how to manage. His skin reddened, his core temperature spiked, sweat broke out across every surface as his body did what it was engineered to do: survive overwhelming environmental challenges by turning them into problems his biology could solve. His sweat glands opened like floodgates. Perspiration poured off him, evaporating almost instantly in the superheated air and carrying away the excess thermal energy through the most efficient cooling system evolution had ever devised. Beneath his hands, Alara's rigidity eased. Her glow diminished from solar flare to candlelight. Her eyes, which had been locked open in pain, fluttered and focused. "Garrett," her voice was raw. "Right here, ma'am. You're touching me." "Yes, ma'am." "You should be dead." "Not yet, ma'am." Her hands came up slowly, uncertain, and touched his where they rested on her shoulders. Her fingers, which could stop hearts, pressed against his wrists. After 15 years of killing with contact, she touched another being in distress and did not destroy them. For the first time, someone touched her back and survived. Alara made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and clung to him. Garrett held position, his body continuing to regulate the temperature differential between them. His palms were burned, his shoulders ached. His internal temperature was spiking toward dangerous levels. But he had been in worse conditions. Barely, but he had survived worse. "You're so cold," Alara whispered against his chest. "I'm actually about 15 degrees above normal operating temperature, ma'am." "To me, you're cold. You're the only cold thing in my burning world." Her grip tightened, desperate and grateful and terrified of letting go. Garrett maintained his hold, becoming the anchor she needed. The heat sink. The steady presence that could absorb her power and give her something she had not had in 15 years. Physical contact during crisis. Touch without death. Connection. Isolde stood in the doorway with tears streaming down her face, watching her Empress finally find what she had been missing. Palace guards stormed in. Medical teams rushed forward. But Garrett did not move. He had a job to do. He was the anchor, the heat sink, the cold thing in her burning world. And he would be damned if he let go. The aftermath transformed Alara's chamber into controlled chaos. The assassin, identified as Sarah, was secured and removed for interrogation. The Praetorian guards who had failed to protect their Empress were treated for stun weapon exposure and relieved of duty pending investigation. Medical personnel swarmed with scanners and injectors and concerned expressions. Through it all, Alara made one thing absolutely clear. Captain Thane is now my personal protector. Effective immediately, he will be positioned within contact range at all times. Clear his previous obligations. From this moment forward, he is assigned exclusively to my security detail. The pronouncement sent shockwaves through the command structure, more profound than any bioelectric discharge. Lord Dravek protested about proper protocol. General Thorne argued about military chain of command. Alara overruled them all with a voice that cracked like thunder and left no room for debate. "I have made my decision. It will be implemented immediately." Over the following days, the palace adjusted to its new reality. Garrett took up position in chambers adjacent to Alara's suite. During council sessions, he stood within arm's reach of her throne. When she walked the gardens, he walked beside her rather than trailing at a respectful distance. And they practiced. In private moments, when the demands of Empire briefly released their grip, Alara worked to control her output while Garrett learned to manage the heat transfer. She would touch his hand, just fingertips at first, and focus on regulating the energy flow. He would breathe through the discomfort, his metabolism working overtime to dissipate the excess heat. Minutes became easier, then longer stretches. The awkwardness faded as they learned each other's rhythms and limits. Isolde watched it all with a smile that made her look 20 years younger. Her Empress was laughing again, touching another being, living instead of merely surviving. But in the shadows, Lord Dravek met with General Thorne in secured chambers where no surveillance could reach. They spoke in careful code about weakness and dependency and the need for strong leadership untainted by alien influence. "She has grown dependent on him," Dravek said, his voice smooth as poisoned honey. "That dependency is a vulnerability we can exploit." Thorne nodded slowly. "What did you have in mind?" Dravek pulled up technical schematics on a secure display. Blueprints for a device that had been theoretical until now, a dampener field generator that could suppress all bioelectric activity within a defined radius. "The Grand Ball is in 3 days. Every noble house will attend. The perfect stage for demonstrating that our Empress has become too weak to rule." He smiled. "And her pet human will be powerless to stop it when we strip away the very thing that makes him useful to her." Thorne studied the schematics with calculating eyes. This could trigger civil war. Or it could save the Empire from a ruler who places personal comfort above strategic necessity. Dravek's expression hardened. "We do what must be done, for the good of the salary people." In her quarters, Alara woke from uneasy dreams to find Isolde standing by her bedside, worry creasing her features in the pre-dawn light. "Your Radiance, my intelligence network has uncovered something. Lord Dravek and General Thorne have been meeting secretly. They are planning something for the Grand Ball." Alara sat up, instantly alert. "What kind of something?" "I don't have details yet, but the word being used is dampener and coup." The information settled into Alara's mind like stones dropping into still water. She had known Dravek and Thorne were threats, had known they would attempt something eventually. But this soon at the grand ball where hundreds would witness whatever they had planned. Cancel the ball, Isolde urged, or at minimum do not attend. Let them make their move in your absence and arrest them for treason. Alara was quiet for a long moment thinking. Then she shook her head. No, if I hide from them, I prove their point. That I am weak. That I have become dependent on Garrett to the point of cowardice. She met Isolde's eyes. I will attend the ball. I will stand before the entire empire. And I will show them that vulnerability is not the same as weakness. Your radiance? It's decided, Isolde. Inform Captain Thane. Tell him to be ready for anything. When Isolde left, Alara remained sitting in the darkness, one hand raised before her face. Electricity rippled across her palm, beautiful and deadly and utterly under her control for the first time in years. She had spent 15 years being afraid. Afraid of her power, afraid of hurting people, afraid of the loneliness that came with being untouchable. But Garrett had taught her something in these brief weeks together. Strength came in many forms, and sometimes the bravest thing you could do was choose vulnerability, choose connection, choose to trust another being even when it meant risking everything. The grand ball would come. Dravik and Thorn would make their move, and Alara would face it not as the isolated Empress who killed everyone she touched, but as someone who had finally learned she did not have to face anything alone. Not anymore by The grand ballroom had been designed to inspire awe. Crystal chandeliers descended from vaulted ceilings, like frozen waterfalls refracting light into 10,000 dancing fragments. Bioluminescent decorations wound through pillars pulsing in rhythm with carefully composed music. The floor itself was polished to mirror brightness, doubling the splendor and making the vast space seem infinite. 600 guests filled that infinity. Every noble house had sent representatives. Military commanders in dress uniforms heavy with medals. Diplomats draped in silks that cost more than most beings earned in a lifetime. Merchants whose wealth rivaled that of minor planets. All of them dressed to impress, all of them watching each other with the careful calculation of predators at a watering hole. This was the empire on display, beautiful and dangerous and absolutely political. Alara stood on the central platform in her ceremonial armor, feeling the weight of 600 pairs of eyes. The armor had been polished until it gleamed golden plates catching light and throwing it back in blinding arcs. Her dark hair had been styled in traditional braids woven with platinum wire. She looked every inch the Empress, powerful and untouchable and utterly in control. It was a magnificent lie. Beneath the armor and ceremony, Alara's heart raced with anticipation and dread. Isolde's intelligence network had confirmed the threat but provided no specifics. Something would happen tonight. Dravik and Thorn would make their move. And she had chosen to stand here anyway, surrounded by potential enemies, because hiding would have been worse than whatever they had planned. Garrett stood 3 paces to her right, positioned close enough to intervene but far enough to maintain the appearance of protocol. His dress uniform was impeccable, but Alara knew he wore his sidearm beneath the jacket, the primitive chemical weapon that technology scanners could not detect. His pale gaze swept the crowd in constant assessment, cataloging exits and threats and potential cover positions. He had tried to convince her not to attend, had argued with uncharacteristic intensity that walking into a known trap was the opposite of strategic thinking. But Alara had been firm. If I hide from them, they win by default. I will not rule this empire from behind walls of fear. Now watching the crowd mill and mingle and pretend this was just another celebration, she wondered if she had made the right choice. Wondered if courage and foolishness were as different as she wanted to believe. Lord Dravik approached with his entourage, his purple robes flowing like oil. His smile was diplomatic perfection, warm and empty as a politician's promise. Your radiance, a magnificent celebration. The empire is fortunate to have such a gracious ruler. Alara returned the smile with equal insincerity. Lord Dravik, I trust you are enjoying the evening. Immensely your radiance, though I notice Captain Thane seems tense. Perhaps he finds our traditions overwhelming. Garrett's expression did not change. Just attentive, Lord Dravik. Standard security protocol. Of course, though one wonders if such visible security suggests weakness. A truly powerful ruler needs no bodyguard, yes. The verbal jab was obvious. Alara felt power surge across her fingertips, a physical manifestation of irritation. A truly wise ruler uses every resource available. But perhaps we have different definitions of wisdom. Dravek's smile tightened fractionally. Perhaps we do, your radiance. He withdrew into the crowd and Alara watched him go with growing unease. The conversation had felt like a countdown, like a man checking his chronometer before a scheduled execution. The music swelled. Dancers took their positions for the traditional opening waltz. Alara descended from the platform to lead the first dance as custom dictated. It would be performed alone, of course. No partner could withstand her bioelectric field for the duration of a waltz. Another reminder of her isolation wrapped in ceremony and presented as tradition. She took her position in the center of the floor. The music began. She moved through the forms. With practiced grace, her arms extended toward an invisible partner, turning and gliding through steps designed for two, but performed by one. The crowd watched in appreciative silence. This was the glass Empress in her element, beautiful and tragic and utterly alone. Then the lights died. Not flickered, not dimmed. Died instantly and completely, as if someone had severed the connection between the ballroom and every power source in the palace. Emergency bioluminescence strips activated after a 3-second delay, casting everything in sickly blue half-light that turned familiar faces strange. Alara felt it immediately. The familiar warmth of her bioelectric field, the constant hum of power beneath her skin began to fade. Not slowly, not gradually, but like water draining from a breached hull, pouring out of her faster than her body could regenerate it. Her legs buckled. She went down hard knees, impacting the polished floor with a crack that sent pain shooting up her thighs. Around her other salary clutched at their throats and chests as their own weaker bioelectric systems failed. Technology sparked and died. Energy weapons powered down. Even the architectural bioluminescence began fading as the effect spread. Dampener field. The realization hit with crystalline clarity. They had built a dampener field generator. Breaking 15 years of constant power, Alara's bioelectricity was gone. Completely, utterly gone. She felt naked without it, vulnerable in a way she had not experienced since childhood. Every nerve ending that had spent decades managing dangerous levels of electricity now reported only absence. Emptiness where there should have been energy. Air flooded through her. This was what normal beings felt like. Powerless, mortal, utterly dependent on physical strength and wits to survive. She tried to stand and failed. Her muscles, so accustomed to the constant low-level charge running through them, did not respond properly without it. She got as far as her hands and knees before her arms gave out. Medical emergency. Isolde's voice cut through the chaos. The Empress needs a new ruler. General Thorne strode through the panicking crowd, and Alara understood immediately why he had not collapsed like the others. He wore a battery-powered exoskeleton beneath his dress uniform, stored energy in shielded cells that the dampener field could not touch. In his hand, an energy sword hummed to life, also battery-powered, also immune to the field, suppressing everything else. He looked down at Alara with something approaching pity. Your radiance, your dependency on the human has made you weak. Your condition has made you a liability. For the good of the Empire, I am relieving you of command. Alara tried to speak, but her voice came out as a whisper. Without her power, even breathing felt wrong. Too easy, too simple, like something vital had been stripped away. Garrett moved. He stepped between Thorne and Alara with fluid economy of motion, his right hand moving to his jacket. When it emerged, it held the primitive sidearm. Chemical propellant, mechanical firing pin. Technology so old and simple that the dampener field treated it like a museum piece. He fired once. The kinetic round punched through a decorative column 6 inches from Thorne's head. The chemical explosion of gunpowder echoed like thunder in the suddenly silent ballroom. Thorne froze. The crowd gasped. Alara, still on her hands and knees, watched with a strange mixture of terror and fascination. Garrett racked the slide, chambering another round. His voice carried across the ballroom with absolute authority. My weapon uses gunpowder, General. Chemistry, not energy, and physics doesn't have an off switch. Anyone who wants to bleed over politics, step forward. 6 of Thorne's soldiers moved from positions throughout the crowd, their weapons ranging from energy blades to impact batons. All battery-powered, all functional despite the dampener field. Garrett fired twice more. Warning shots that shattered crystal sculptures and sent nobles diving for cover. "Stay down," he commanded the crowd. "Everyone except the conspirators stay down and you will not be hurt." Thorne's face twisted with rage. "Kill him, that is an order." The soldiers hesitated. They had signed up for a coup, not a gunfight with the Deathworlder who had just proven he was armed and operational while they carried melee weapons. Thorne snarled and activated his exoskeleton's boost function. He charged with enhanced speed, his energy sword raised for a decapitating strike. Garrett holstered his pistol and met the charge head-on. The blade came down. Garrett sidestepped with minimal movement, grabbed Thorne's wrist, and used the general's own momentum to throw him into a banquet table. Food and crystal exploded across the floor in a cascade of waste and broken beauty. Alara watched helpless and horrified and strangely proud. This was what Garrett did, what he was built for. Not standing in bioelectric fields or drinking poison, but combat. Direct, brutal, effective combat. Thorne rose his armor servos, whining. "You cannot win, human. I have 20 soldiers, cutting-edge equipment, and you have what? A primitive weapon with limited ammunition." Garrett remained steady. "I have motivation, General. You are threatening someone under my protection." "That is a problem." "For whom?" "You mostly." Thorne roared and charged again. This time Garrett did not dodge. He stepped into the impact and locked his arms around the exoskeleton's chest in a bear hug. Then he began to squeeze. Alara heard the creak of metal under stress, saw Thorne's eyes widen as he realized what was happening. The Deathworlder was dismantling his armor with raw physical strength, bypassing the plating to dig fingers into exposed cabling at the suit's joints. Hydraulic lines burst, power couplings cracked. The battery housing buckled as Garrett ripped it free, sparks cascading from severed connections. "Impossible," Thorne gasped. Garrett threw him 20 feet across the ballroom, crashing into his own soldiers and scattering them like bowling pins. Then he retrieved his pistol and moved to cover Alara's position. "Can you stand, ma'am?" She tried, failed. Her body simply would not cooperate without the power she had relied on for 15 years. "No, I'm sorry, I cannot." "Don't apologize." He extended his hand. "Garrett to Isolde. We need to get the Empress away from the dampener field." "Where is the generator?" Isolde's voice came through his communication device, tight with stress. "Basement level, sub-level 3 maintenance section." Garrett looked around at 600 witnesses, at Thorne struggling to remove his damaged armor, at the soldiers trying to decide if following their general was worth dying for. "Right. New plan. I'm taking the Empress to safety. Anyone who follows with hostile intent gets shot. Anyone who helps the general gets shot. Anyone who does anything other than stay exactly where they are." He paused for effect. "Also gets shot. You have 10 minutes to be anywhere except in my way." He scooped Alara into his arms. She was terrifyingly light without her power, her usual vibrancy reduced to fragility. Isolde appeared at his side, medical kit in hand and determination on her face. "Let's move." They retreated through service corridors, Alara cradled against Garrett's chest like something precious and breakable. Behind them, the ballroom erupted into chaos as Thorne screamed orders that fewer and fewer soldiers seemed willing to follow. The maintenance tunnels beneath the palace were utilitarian and ugly. Exposed conduit and bare metal walls, the infrastructure kept hidden from elegant levels above. Garrett carried Alara through passages barely wide enough for his shoulders, following Isolde's hurried directions, while his tactical sense screamed about ambush points and kill zones. Alara drifted in and out of awareness. Without her power, her body was struggling to maintain basic functions. 15 years of cellular adaptation to high bioelectric loads meant her physiology had optimized for conditions that no longer existed. Now suddenly normal, she was failing. "Garrett," her voice was barely audible. "Save your strength, ma'am." "Leave me, get to the dampener, shut it down." "No, that's an order." "With respect, ma'am, your orders don't supersede my primary objective." He adjusted his grip, holding her more securely. "Keeping you alive comes first. Everything else is secondary." A rifle shot cracked behind them. Garrett spun, placing his body between the sound and Alara. The round sparked off metal piping 3 feet to his right. Suppressive fire not aimed. Thorne's soldiers were following, but did not have clean sight lines. "How many rounds do you have left?" Isolde panted, not built for running at this pace. 12 in the magazine, 1 chambered, plus 2 spare magazines." 41 rounds total. Is that sufficient? It's enough. He rounded a corner, checked their six, kept moving. Isolde, how much farther? 200 meters, then down another level. Another shot closer this time. Garrett returned fire without fully stopping, 3 rounds precisely placed to ricochet off walls and pipes and force the pursuers into cover. He was not trying to hit them, just make them remember that following was dangerous. They descended to sub-level 3 through a service ladder, Garrett climbing one-handed while holding Alara against his shoulder. Below the dampener's hum was audible, a deep thrumming that made his teeth ache. The generator room was locked behind a reinforced door. Garrett set Alara down, carefully stepped back and kicked. Once. Twice. The third impact bent the frame enough that he could pry it open with his hands, metal shrieking as it deformed. Inside, the dampener generator sat like a malevolent sculpture. A sphere of interlocking components, cables running to power conduits in the walls. 2 of Thorne's technicians monitored it, their eyes widening as Garrett entered. One reached for a communicator. Garrett shot it out of his hand. Not the hand itself, just the device. The technician stared at his intact fingers in shock. "How do I turn this off?" Garrett demanded. "You can't," the first technician said quickly. "It requires a 30-minute shutdown sequence to prevent cascade failure. If you just destroy it, the energy discharge could kill everyone in the palace." Garrett looked at the sphere, at Alara barely conscious behind him, at the timer display showing the dampener had been running for 12 minutes. 30 minutes minimum to safely shut down. Thorne's soldiers would breach the room long before that. Then we wait. He positioned himself at the door, pistol ready. Isolde watched them. If either moves wrong, yell. "I'm not security personnel, Captain." "You are now." The next 20 minutes were the longest of Alara's life. She drifted at the edge of consciousness, aware of Garrett at the door, aware of gunfire and shouted orders and the steady count of rounds expended. 3 times Thorne's soldiers tried to breach. 3 times Garrett's precisely rationed ammunition drove them back. His shooting was surgical. Knees, shoulders, weapon hands. Disabling shots that left enemies alive but combat ineffective. He was running low, she could tell from the increasing gaps between shots, making every round count. "How long?" he called during a lull. 7 minutes, the technician replied nervously. Outside, Thorne's voice rallied his remaining soldiers for a final push. They would rush all at once, overwhelmed through numbers. Garrett had maybe 8 rounds left. Not enough. Alara tried to speak, tried to tell him something, anything, but her body would not cooperate. Then the timer hit 0. The dampener's hum cut off like a switch being thrown. The effect was instantaneous. Power flooded back into Alara's body with the force of a tidal wave breaking against shore. After 15 years of constant bioelectric charge, after 12 minutes of terrible absence, the return of her power felt like resurrection. She screamed, not in pain but in fury, in relief, in the pure, overwhelming sensation of being whole again. Electricity cascaded across her skin like living lightning. The bioluminescent veins beneath her flesh blazed bright enough to illuminate the entire room. Energy arced from her fingertips to every metal surface, scorching walls and ceiling and floor. She rose, not stood, rose, lifted by the force of her own power returning. Garrett lowered his weapon, his last magazine still loaded, and stepped aside. Alara extended one hand toward the door, where Thorne's soldiers were massing for their final assault. Lightning arced down the corridor in a cascade of blue-white fury. Not to kill, she had had enough of death, but to stun, to throw, to remind everyone why she was Empress. When the smoke cleared, 8 soldiers lay unconscious or groaning. Thorne stood at the corridor's far end, his damaged armor sparking his energy, sword long since depleted. "Stand down, General." Alara's voice echoed with power, resonating through the tunnels. "This is over." Thorne looked at her, at Garrett standing protective at her side, at his coup scattered across 3 palace floors. His shoulders sagged in defeat. "Arrest him," Alara commanded. Loyal guards who had been fighting their way down through Thorne's forces finally arrived to comply. They secured the general with restraints designed to hold even enhanced beings, though the fight had gone out of him completely. Alara turned to the technicians. "Shut down the dampener completely. Dismantle it. I want no trace of this technology remaining operational." "Yes, Your Radiance." She looked at Garrett, then really looked at him. His uniform was scorched and torn. Blood seeped from a graze wound across his ribs where a shot had come too close. His face showed the exhaustion of sustained combat, but his eyes remained steady. You saved my life, Captain Thane. That's the job, ma'am. It's more than that. She moved toward him, energy still dancing across her skin. You stood between me and death when I was powerless to protect myself. You held a door against overwhelming force with nothing but primitive weapons and determination. You would have done the same for me. Yes, I would have. But I have power to make such stands possible. You had only courage. She stopped in front of him, close enough that her bioelectric field made his skin prickle. Thank you for not letting go. You asked me not to. That first night when you were dying, you asked me not to let go, and I said I wouldn't. I keep my promises. The joy escaped before she could suppress it. Yes, you do. The throne room had been repurposed as a tribunal chamber. Alara sat elevated on her throne, her power fully restored, and making the air shimmer with potential energy. The court filled every available space, nobles and military officers and bureaucrats all wanting to witness justice. General Thorne stood in restraints before her, his armor stripped away, facing his Empress in defeat. Beside him, Lord Dravavek looked smaller, somehow his elegant robes unable to mask the collapse of his political power. The evidence is clear, Alara announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. General Thorne led an armed coup. Lord Dravek provided intelligence resources and political cover. Together you attempted to murder your Empress and seize control of the Empire through violence. We acted for the Empire, Thorne said, defiant even in defeat. Your weakness was endangering everything we have built. Lightning cracked from Alara's hand, stopping inches from Thorne's face. The heat of it singed his eyebrows, made his skin redden with instant sunburn. My weakness, I survived assassination. I survived poisoning. I survived your coup. What exactly is weak about that? She stood descending from her throne with lethal grace. You believed I was weak because I found someone who could withstand my power. Because I stopped being alone. You mistook vulnerability for weakness, connection for dependency. She circled the prisoners, and every eye in the room followed her movement. But you were wrong. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is honesty. It is courage. It is choosing to trust another being even when isolation would be safer. She stopped directly in front of Dravek. You depend on intelligence networks and political alliances. Does that make you weak, Lord Dravek? That is different, your radiance. Is it? You cannot rule alone either. None of us can. The difference is that I am honest about my limitations while you hide yours behind rhetoric and manipulation. She turned to address the full court. Traditional punishment for treason is execution, swift in public to serve as warning to others who might consider similar actions. Thorne straightened, preparing to face death with dignity. I am not giving you that satisfaction, Alara continued. Instead, you will be exiled to Outpost Taro 9, a mining colony, low technology, manual labor, no servants or privileges. You will spend your remaining years learning what it means to survive without the advantages you took for granted. The court murmured. Some considered it mercy. Others thought it worse than death for being accustomed to luxury and power. You cannot, Thorne began. I can. I did. And I will tell you why. Alara's voice cut through his protest like a blade. Because executing you would be easy. It would satisfy the crowd. It would follow tradition. But it would also prove your point. That power must always answer with death. That strength requires cruelty. She gestured to Garrett standing at parade rest near the throne. Captain Thane showed me a different way. He proved that strength can be used for protection instead of destruction. That vulnerability can coexist with power. That mercy from a position of strength sends a far more profound message than violence ever could. She met Thorne's eyes. I am strong enough to spare you. Strong enough to choose compassion over vengeance. Strong enough to show the Empire that we can be better than we have been. The silence that followed was profound. Then slowly applause began. Not universal, not unanimous, but spreading through the chamber as beings recognized what they were witnessing. Not just justice, but evolution. Not just punishment, but transformation. Guards removed them. As Thorne and Dravek were led away, Alara returned to her throne, but she did not sit. Instead, she gestured for Garrett to approach. He walked forward, his bearing military perfect, despite his injuries, and stopped at the base of the dais. Captain Garrett Thane of Terra. Alora's voice rang with ceremonial formality. You have served this empire with distinction. You have protected your Empress against impossible odds. You have proven that strength comes in many forms, and that honor transcends species. She descended the steps to stand level with him. For your service, for your courage, and for showing me that I do not have to face the universe alone, I hereby grant you the title of Royal Consort and Protector. You will stand at my side not as servant or subordinate, but as equal partner in rule. The court erupted, some in genuine celebration, others in diplomatic approval, all acknowledging the inevitable. Garrett had saved the Empress too many times, proven his value too thoroughly to be anything less than essential. Garrett inclined his head. Aton, I accept your radiance, though I should note that equal partner is generous. You can generate lightning and I can lift heavy objects. Laughter rippled through the assembly, breaking the formal tension. Elara smiled genuine and unguarded. You can also survive me touching you, Captain Thane, which remains the most remarkable feat anyone has accomplished in 15 years. She extended her hand. Garrett took it without hesitation, their fingers intertwining. Electricity danced across the contact point, visible and dramatic but harmless to him. The court watched in amazement as their Empress held hands with a human, as the lethal bioelectric field that had isolated her for 15 years met someone who could withstand it. There is one more thing, Elara announced, her hand still in Garrett's. Effective immediately, Terra and the Salary Empire are entering a formal alliance. We will share technology, resources, and knowledge. More importantly, we will share understanding. She looked at Garrett, then back to the assembled empire. Because if a Salary Empress and a human soldier can find common ground, if we can bridge the gap between species and biology and expectation, then perhaps our peoples can as well. Perhaps we can build something better than what we have had. The applause this time was thunderous. History being made, alliances being forged, a future being written in real time. Later, after the ceremony concluded and diplomats began their negotiations and military officers started implementing new protocols, Elara and Garrett retreated to their balcony, the one that had become theirs through repeated use, the place where conversations happened and truths were spoken, and two beings from different worlds found connection. So, Royal Consort, Elara leaned against the railing, watching the city lights below. How does it feel? Terrifying, ma'am. Absolutely terrifying. She laughed. At least you're honest. You've mentioned that you appreciate honesty. I do. She turned to face him, her bioluminescence soft in the evening light. I need you to know something, Garrett. What I said in there about you showing me a different way. I meant it. You changed how I see power, how I see myself. You did the changing, ma'am. I just stood nearby while you figured things out. You did more than that. You stood between me and death when I was powerless. You held your ground when anyone else would have run. You chose to stay when leaving would have been safer. Her voice grew quiet. You taught me that needing someone is not weakness, that accepting help is strength, that vulnerability can be chosen rather than forced. Garrett was silent for a moment. For what it's worth, you taught me some things too. Such as that power is not the same as cruelty, that being strong does not require being isolated, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose connection even when it scares you. Elara felt warmth that had nothing to do with her bioelectric field spread through her chest. We are quite a pair, aren't we? Could be worse, could be boring. Yes, that would be tragic. The weeks following the tribunal brought change that rippled through the empire like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Alara's reforms, no longer hindered by Drawbeck's political maneuvering or Thorne's military resistance, began to take root. Merit-based advancement replaced hereditary privilege in key positions. Trade agreements with Terra opened new markets and technologies. Military doctrines shifted from aggressive expansion to strategic defense and alliance building. Not everyone welcomed the changes. Noble houses protested the erosion of their traditional power. Military hardliners grumbled about the weakening of salary superiority. But Elara stood firm. Garrett steady at her side, and slowly the Empire began to understand that evolution was not the same as weakness. The palace itself felt different. Guards still maintained security protocols, but the atmosphere had lightened. Courtiers no longer whispered nervously about the glass Empress and her lethal touch. Instead, they watched with fascination as she walked through gardens with her human consort, their hands intertwined, electricity dancing harmlessly between them. Isolde observed it all with satisfaction that went deeper than professional pride. One morning while arranging Alara's chambers, she found herself crying unexpectedly, not from sadness, but from overwhelming relief. For 12 years, she had served an empress who barely existed, who went through the motions of ruling while slowly crystallizing into something beautiful and dead. Now finally, Alara was alive, laughing, touching another being, living instead of merely surviving. "Are you well?" Alara asked, finding her handmaiden with tears streaming down her face. "Perfectly well, your radiance." Isolde wiped at her eyes. "I am simply grateful. For 12 years, I watched you shoulder the burden of empire alone. Now you have someone who can stand beside you, someone who stays." Alara moved close enough to touch Isolde's shoulder, carefully controlling her output. The older woman did not flinch, accustomed now to the measured contact. "I could not have survived without you, Isolde. You stood too far away to touch, but never too far to help. Thank you for not giving up on me. You made that impossible, your radiance. You were always worth believing in." 3 months after the coup, Alara announced plans to tour the outer territories. Lord Dravek's network had spread lies about her weakness and dependency. She would counter those lies with presence and proof. "It could be dangerous," Garrett observed during the planning session. "The outer territories are where Dravek and Thorn had their strongest support. Not everyone will be pleased to see evidence that contradicts their preferred narrative, which is precisely why we must go." Ilara studied the territorial maps spread across the conference table. "Fear thrives in absence. We will give them presence instead." The tour lasted 6 weeks and covered 12 territories. At each stop, Alara demonstrated that the reforms were not theoretical abstractions, but practical improvements. She met with miners whose new safety regulations had reduced deaths by 40%. She spoke with merchants whose trade with Terra had expanded their markets. She listened to military officers whose alliance with Terran forces had strengthened rather than weakened their strategic position. And everywhere people saw their empress touch her consort freely, saw the electricity dance between them without harm, saw proof that vulnerability and strength could coexist. In a mining settlement on the Outer Rim, a young Solari engineer approached them nervously during a public address. The girl could not have been more than 16, her bioluminescent patterns flickering erratically in a way that Alara recognized immediately. "Your radiance, I have the same condition. The bioelectric overload. The physicians say it's progressive like yours. They say I'll have to live alone because I hurt everyone I touch." The crowd went silent, waiting to see how their empress would respond to such a personal plea. Alara knelt, bringing herself to the child's eye level. Then, with conscious control born of months of practice with Garrett, she placed her hand on the girl's shoulder. Energy flowed between them, but measured, controlled. Two unstable bioelectric fields finding equilibrium instead of destruction. "Then you will learn what I learned," Alara said softly, her voice carrying in the silence. "This power does not have to be a prison. There are beings in this universe who can withstand what you are. Not everyone, perhaps, but someone. You just have to find them." She glanced at Garrett, standing patient and protective nearby. "And while you search, never forget that needing help is not weakness. Accepting support is not surrender. It's wisdom. It's courage. It's choosing connection over isolation even when isolation feels safer." The girl's expression, hope, mixed with disbelief, mixed with desperate gratitude, stayed with Alara for days afterward. This was what mercy had bought them. Not just Thorn and Dravek's lives, but proof that strength could nurture instead of destroy. That power could build instead of isolate. That an empire could change when its empress chose to change first. 6 months after the tribunal, the reforms had taken root deeply enough that even skeptics acknowledged their success. Economic indicators showed growth. Military readiness had improved through alliance training. Public satisfaction surveys reported numbers higher than they had been in decades. Alara stood on her balcony one evening watching the binary stars paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. Garrett emerged from the interior chambers carrying 2 glasses of the ceremonial wine that was no longer weaponized. Isolde says you haven't eaten since breakfast. He offered her 1 glass. She's threatening to invoke handmaiden privilege and force-feed you if you don't take care of yourself. Isolde worries too much. Isolde worries the exact right amount. Garrett stood beside her at the railing. You've been running yourself ragged with the reforms. Even empresses need to rest occasionally. Alara accepted the glass, her fingers brushing. The contact no longer felt electric with danger. Just electric. Just connection. There is still so much to do. The outer territories need infrastructure improvements. The alliance treaty with Terra requires finalization. The military integration protocols will still be there tomorrow. Garrett's voice was gentle but firm. The Empire survived for centuries before you. It will survive you taking an evening to breathe. She looked at him, really looked. In 6 months, he had become so integral to her existence that she sometimes forgot what life had been like before. The loneliness, the isolation, the terrible weight of ruling alone. I have been thinking, she said. Should I be concerned? Possibly. She turned to face him fully, her glow soft in the twilight. Do you remember that first day when you walked into my throne room expecting to die? Hard to forget, ma'am. What did you think when you survived? When you realized my power couldn't kill you? Garrett considered this. Honestly, I thought it was going to complicate things significantly. And has it? Absolutely, but in good ways, mostly. He smiled. What about you? What did you think when I survived? I thought you were impossible. I thought the universe was playing some cruel joke on me, dangling hope just to snatch it away later. She moved closer, close enough that her aura made his skin tingle with familiar warmth. I thought there was no way someone like you could be real. And now I know you are real. I know you are here. I know I don't have to face mine thing alone anymore. She reached up her hand, touching his jaw. Always carefully, always measuring her output, but touching. I know that 15 years of isolation taught me something valuable. What's that? To appreciate connection when I finally found it. To never take for granted the miracle of being able to touch another being without killing them. To understand that vulnerability is not something to fear, but something to choose. Garrett's hand came up to cover hers. Alara. Garrett. She smiled at the sound of her name without titles. May I try something? Should I be concerned? Possibly. She rose on her toes, closing the height difference between them. Her other hand touched his chest, feeling his heartbeat through the fabric. Strong and steady as he had been from the beginning. As he continued to be. I'm going to kiss you now, she said. If you object, this is your moment to say so. No objections, ma'am. Alara. No objections, Alara. She kissed him. Electricity arced between them, visible in the twilight. Blue-white tendrils leaping from her skin to his following pathways through ionized air. Beautiful and powerful and completely controlled. Her bioelectric field surged, responding to emotion, but she kept it at levels his physiology could manage. Every nerve ending in Garrett's body registered the charge flowing through him, but beneath the discomfort lived something profound. 15 years this woman had gone without physical contact, and she chose to break that isolation with him. Not because circumstances forced it, because she wanted to. Alara felt the moment crystallize into significance, her power flowing into him, his body accepting it, both of them choosing vulnerability over safety. Control was no longer about suppression. It was about trust, about deciding that connection mattered more than perfect defense, about believing that love was worth the risk. Garrett's arms came around her, pulling her closer despite the charge flowing through his nervous system. His skin tingled, his core temperature spiked. His enhanced metabolism worked overtime to dissipate the excess energy as heat and sweat broke out across his skin. It was uncomfortable. It was overwhelming. It was absolutely worth it. When they separated, both breathing harder, Alara laughed with pure joy. That's new, she said. Very new. Good new or concerning new. Definitely good new. Garrett's smile was genuine. Though I may need a moment to recover. You pack quite a charge. I can modulate it better with practice. I'm willing to help you practice. She laughed again, the sound free and unguarded. 15 years of isolation had not stolen her capacity for joy, just hidden it beneath fear and loneliness. Now finally it could emerge. They stood together as full dark settled over the city. The empire spread out below them, no longer a burden to be carried alone, but a responsibility to be shared. Challenges remained, politics and threats, and the endless complications of ruling. But they would face those together. The glass Empress had found her anchor. The Deathworlder had found his purpose. And together they had found something that transcended species and biology and all the reasons why it should have been impossible. They had found each other. And that in the end was the only miracle that mattered. The city lights below pulsed in rhythm with the Empire's heartbeat. Somewhere in those streets, a young engineer with unstable bioelectric output was learning that her condition was not a death sentence. Somewhere merchants were negotiating trade agreements that would have been impossible 6 months ago. Somewhere soldiers from two different worlds were training together, learning that strength came in many forms. The transformation Alara and Garrett had sparked was spreading, not quickly, not easily, but inevitably like water finding new channels through stone. The Empire was learning what its Empress had learned. That vulnerability was not weakness. That connection was not dependency. That choosing to trust, to reach out, to touch, despite the risk, was the bravest thing anyone could do. And as the binary stars set below the horizon and the night deepened around them, Alara leaned into Garrett's warmth and thought about the future. Not with fear or dread or the heavy weight of isolation, but with hope, with anticipation, with the quiet certainty that whatever challenges came next, she would not face them alone, never alone again. The glass storm had learned to touch without destroying. The Deathworlder had proven that survival was not the same as living. And together they had shown an empire that the greatest power was not the ability to stand apart, but the courage to stand together.